What's up, reading and writing lovers? Sandy back here with an AuthorTube video here. And the thing that I wanted to really discuss today is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. And that's the writing that for me goes back to my high school days when I really got into writing what I call exercise for the imagination. And so when I started writing, it was really a form of expression for me. And it was also an opportunity to be creative and to create my own entertainment in a way to complement the other forms of entertainment that we get as regular human beings, or as regular is for many of us. And over the years, some story ideas are hit and some story ideas are miss. Some miss worse than others. And when I started writing initially, I started writing in composition books. And as I started writing in those composition books and I started stacking up these composition books, the joy of writing became more and more intense for me. So I don't know how many of you out there still actually physically get a pen or pencil to paper to do your writing. Nothing wrong with that for those of you who do it. But I stopped doing that after a while, but not before I stacked up a ton of composition books filled with my writing. And again, some stories, like I said before, are hit or miss. Some were really good that I was really excited about, and I just kept writing and writing and writing and writing and writing. And then the next thing you know, you got 80, 90,000, 100,000 words, and you're just kind of like, wow, this is just, exercise for the imagination, just an outlet for the imagination to breathe and to continue to grow and to develop. And so I wrote so many stories. And again, the ones that were hit, I remember. But actually, to be honest with you, kind of like a coach in sports, you sometimes remember the ones that you lost more than the ones that you won. And so in sports, sometimes coaches will think more about the games that they lost, where they could have done one or two things a little bit differently and they could have been successful, and then they kick themselves because they did not, or the team did not do those one or two things that could have maybe made the difference between defeat and victory. And I think that same principle is probably true in writing as well, because there are many stories that I would get, a few pages into the composition book and I'd be feeling really good, maybe get halfway through, 3/4 of the way through, and I'd feel pretty good, and then you kind of stall. And so I had a lot of stalling over the years. As I went from composition books to when I got my first laptop computer, a Texas Instruments computer that is about as heavy as a cinder block, maybe 2 cinder blocks, I started to write in that computer, and that made it maybe a little bit easier, a little bit faster to write into a computer. And I continued to develop these stories. And again, some were hit, some were miss. And then over the years, I've just had this graveyard of stories. And in more recent years, I've been working to try to go back to some of those stories that I started to be able to finish them. And so some of them I'm trying to rescue from old computers, from old laptops. So you've got your story graveyard, and then you got your laptop graveyard. And I do have a laptop graveyard that I'm going to be digging through, as creepy as that might sound if you carry the analogy a little too far. I say all that to say that when you have an idea, and I lost the story idea that I had last night before I did this video, and I'm just kicking myself for not writing it down, even though I had the idea and it struck me at probably about 3 or 4 in the morning. But I'm like, normally I would get up and I would just write it down to make sure I do not forget it, because more often than not, I tend to forget. So I would rather start a story and stall or fail than to not start a story at all. So when you're writing, just put it down. Like I have in my computer right now, I've got probably 50 story ideas that I've outlined that I could work on if I get ready to. And the reason that I have so many now, that more than I used to before, is because when I get the idea, like I said, I just put it down, because I want to make sure that if that idea appeals to me somewhere down the line, I want to make sure that I don't have to think, man, what was that story idea that I had? I want it to be right there, and I can just go right to it in my computer. So if you get the idea and you get hit by inspiration, write it down, type it out. Whether you have to write it down on a notepad, or you type it into your computer, or you use your phone to dictate it into your phone, into your notes, just find a way to get that story down in case it comes back to you and you feel a little bit more strongly about it an hour from when you first had the idea, a week from when you first had the idea, a month from when you first had the idea, or a year from when you first had the idea. It'll always be there and you can always go back to it. So it's better to start and not finish than to never have started at all. So while I have a ton of stories that I will probably never finish, stories that I had in composition books that I still possess to this day, or story on hard drives of computers that maybe will never see a middle and an end, even though they do have the start, I still am glad that I started it, even if I never finish it, because you can't get to the finish line if you don't start. And so make sure that you start it, even if you don't finish it. That's it for now on AuthorTube. Just a little story about my author graveyard and why I have all these stories that I've never finished, and I hope someday that I will finish. But the problem is I just have so many ideas that just running around in my head at all times that the story idea that seemed cool an hour ago sometimes gives way to a new story that just sounds even more exciting, even newer, even fresher, with even more interesting characters. So that's the way it goes. But again, better to get that story idea on paper, even if you never do anything with it, than to not get it on paper and try to remember what was that story idea that I should have written down, but I didn't.